So the women's Euros are upon us, which I'm super excited about for two reasons, really. Firstly, as a non-European, this allows me to kind of just sit back and enjoy watching football for the sake of watching football. I don't really have any strong leanings towards any of these teams, which means that I won't have any like emotional involvement. I can just kind of enjoy watching football, and that's really nice sometimes. But also, I'm excited about it because there's a really high standard of play that's going to be at these Euros. Because women's football in Europe is going in a massively positive direction. We've got more clubs professionalizing, greater interest, greater investment in the women's game than there has been in a really long time, which means we're seeing more women pick up football, which increases the player pools that nations can choose from, and that inevitably leads to a higher standard at such tournaments. So probably at these Euros is the highest standard we have ever seen at a women's Euros. That'll probably be the case in 2029 as well because we're only going in a better direction at the moment, and that's really exciting. There's a lot of really good teams, and there's going to be quite a spectacle at these Euros, I think. So it's just going to be really fun to watch. And so I'm going to try and preview each group. I didn't quite make it through Gold Cup or Club World Cup groups, but hopefully I'm more successful in this endeavor. We'll start with Group A, where we've got the host Switzerland, Iceland, Norway, and Finland. So three Nordic teams plus Switzerland. And this is almost certainly the most open group at the Euros. That tends to happen when a nation that isn't like super high up the rankings hosts because they get into pot one, they host Group A, which means that the other three teams have a better chance usually than they would have with a better nation in it. So that means that all four teams will have a realistic possibility of progression, but Finland and Switzerland will not be as favored as Iceland and Norway. We'll start with Finland, who I'd say have, at the very least, the coolest nickname at these Euros and in this group, where they've got the Boreal Owls, which is really cool. But that might be the best Finland's got, because they, since hosting in 2009, in the two tournaments since then, 2013, 2022, they didn't qualify in 2017. They did not win a single game, played six, lost four, draw two. So that's not great for Finland, and they've come into this in not the best of form. That has slightly been aided by the fact that they have had a few big players out. Kuika, it looks like, is going to be back for the Euros, so that will be a pretty big lift. Still, they are probably the weakest team on paper at these Euros. They could compete against Switzerland, but they also don't have the home crowd behind them, Finland. So they don't have the highest expectations, but once again, with the group not really having any huge heavy hitters, there is hope for everyone. So Finland, if everything goes right for them, they could still possibly make it through the group, but I'd say that is unlikely in my eyes. Then we're going to go on to Switzerland, who are probably the next weakest team in this group. When I'm reading about Switzerland, it kind of seems like there's a bit of a question over where this team is, where they've got some like veteran experienced players, and then some younger ones who aren't quite there yet. Like a really promising crop of players, but ones who are fairly inexperienced as well and maybe aren't at the level to really compete at a tournament yet, which is not really a place you want to be in, especially as a host nation going into the Euros. One thing I will say, though, is that it's generally unwise to bet against a host nation. By and large, there are disappointments, for instance, Qatar at the 2022 World Cup, but for the most part, host nations tend to overperform expectations. And when you have that crowd behind you, it really does provide a lift. And so the Switzerland team might still have a shot at progression. It's a shame that Bachmann didn't get to make the tournament, that she got an ACL injury right before. That's quite sad for her because for most of the Switzerland players, this is probably going to be the proudest moments of their careers, getting to play for their nation at a home Euros. So that's quite a shame to see. But they still have a decently competent squad with some age and experience and younger players, but it seems like they haven't quite gelled that yet. But they do have Leah Valti, who, We just came off a season where she won the Champions League. She's never gives the ball away, Super Leah Volti. So that's pretty cool. I'll take every moment to reference that Arsenal are champions of Europe. It's such an awesome feeling. But Volti hasn't actually played that much for Arsenal in the past season, or at the very least in the second half of the season, which is a bit sad to see. So she's fallen out of favor a little bit at Arsenal, but definitely not at Switzerland. I do still have a feeling Switzerland might just make it through because they are a host nation. But in theory, it should be Iceland and Norway who are competing to win the group and for progression. Norway are quite an interesting one because if I were to just list out the names of Norwegian players, we got people like Frida Maanum, Ingrid Engen, Karam Hansen, Ada Hegerberg. These aren't just players who are like really good. Like, these are absolute elite world class players. Frida Maanum coming off a season where she won the Champions League. I don't know if I mentioned, but we are champions of Europe. She is quite good. She's disappointed at times for Arsenal, but she seems to do things that managers really like. And she stayed in that Arsenal team and did a very good job in the Champions League final. And then we've got Hegerberg and Graham Hansen, two players who have either won the Ballon d'Or or come very close to it. Hegerberg winning in 2018 and Graham Hansen finishing runner-up in the most recent Ballon d'Or rankings. Like, there's a lot of very good players for Norway, and on top of that, Norway have a very esteemed history in the women's game. They won the World Cup in 1995. They went on a run of 4 consecutive Euros where they reached the semifinals at least. But then in the last 2 Euros, they've gone out in the group stage, and they've been disappointing recently. They barely made it out of a World Cup group stage that seemed very winnable for them, and they got grouped in the 2022 Euros, which included an 8-0 loss to England. So despite the star-studded squad, and it really is star-studded, they haven't done very well recently. And so they will try and turn that around because there is kind of a prevailing narrative that a lot of these really esteemed world-class players don't perform for Norway. So they'll be eager to turn that around. And this is a great group to try and do that. But there are still questions lingering over this team of whether they will realize that insane potential that they have. They also did lose Bergsvand in defense. And defense has actually been the area where Norway has been the most solid, which is interesting because all of their real big superstars are in attack, but that's a pretty big loss. Still, they've got probably on paper the best team in this group. It's just a matter of whether they actually realize those expectations. Because Iceland will also like their chances of progressing and maybe even winning the group. They've got Vigosdottir, who is the captain both of Iceland and Bayern Munich, captaining one of the premier sides in Europe. If nothing else, Iceland definitely will win the award for the most players whose names end in Dottir. It's one of the really fun things to do with a lot of the Scandinavian countries, really, and Nordic countries, is just read through either the club names or the player names, because all of the Icelandic player names are fun to pronounce. So that's quite an enjoyable thing. But the subject of their actual football team, they have a really good squad right now. Like, this is a seriously competitive Iceland team. And in a group as open as this, there's no reason why they can't win it. They've been somewhat mixed recently in the run-up to the tournament. They've lost a number of games, but those games were against highly esteemed nations, like the true elites of the game, top 10 nations in the world. So those losses aren't massively worrying. They have drawn a lot of games as well, so they're going to have to figure out how to turn draws into wins. But they should make it through. Again, they have a really talented squad, chief among them Vigosdottir, but she's not the only one. It is a talented team, and they're actually, I believe, the highest ranked team heading into this group, which is quite interesting to see how Norway, despite all the stars they have, aren't quite there. So in theory, again, it should be Iceland and Norway who progressed from the group, but I do think Switzerland might manage to progress still because hosts tend to do well. So we'll see what happens. I'm really excited for this tournament, and I will be talking about it, obviously. I'm ready for a very fun time, and I hope you guys enjoy.